Part 1. The Gateway to Secrets. Hey guys, today we step through doors that most of humanity will never even glimpse. Imagine you're standing in the heart of Rome, sunlight bouncing off the marble colonnades of St. Peter's Square. Tourists chatter, cameras click, and pigeons scatter like smoke in the air. But beneath the stone under your feet, beneath the polished grandeur and the scent of incense wafting through basilicas, there is another Vaticanan you are never meant to see. Hallways sealed by iron locks, chambers lined with manuscripts that whisper like restless ghosts, and rumors of objects so dangerous that even speaking their names is said to carry risk. And you, here tonight, are about to step inside. You probably won't survive this, at least not without losing the way you once looked at history, faith, and power. Because once you see what's hidden, you cannot return to the comfort of ignorance. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not chasing numbers. I'm chasing the hidden currents of history, and I'd love for you to be part of that pursuit. Also, drop me a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? I want to know which corners of the world are awake tonight, staring into the same mysteries with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk with me down a narrow stairwell, the air cooling with each step, stone walls sweating in silence. The Vatican above thrums with ritual and light, but here in the shadows lies a different kind of faith. Faith bound not by scripture, but by secrecy. And our first encounter is with a book said to be so dangerous that it was never meant to be opened at all. This is the Grand Grimoire, sometimes called the Red Dragon. In the folklore of Europe, it stands as one of the most feared manuscripts ever whispered about. Its name alone seems to carry the hiss of fire, the rustle of scales. They say within its pages lie the exact words to summon demons, Lucifer himself included, and to bind them under human command. Some call it medieval fantasy. Others insist it is a survival from far older traditions hidden beneath layers of ink and fear. No one agrees when it was first written. Some scholars push it back to the 15th century, that dangerous cusp when the Renaissance bloomed, but shadows of medieval superstition still ruled the night. Others believe it only emerged in the 18th century, when Europe was drunk on secret societies and occult revivals. What all agree upon is that its recipes, rituals, invocations, formula, read like the diary of someone staring too long into the abyss. One legend claims it descends from the wisdom of King Solomon himself. You may know Solomon from biblical stories, the wise king who judged disputes with impossible clarity. But in other traditions, he was more than a ruler. He was a master of spirits, a man who could summon angels and demons alike, commanding them to build his temple and guard his treasures. The Grand Grimoire, if you believe the whispers, is one of those treasures, a handbook passed through centuries like a cursed inheritance. But here's the part that pulls us directly into the Vatican's labyrinth of secrecy. For centuries, rumors have persisted that the only surviving original copy of the Grand Grimoire is hidden in the Vatican's secret archives, locked away not because the Church reveres it, but because it fears it. Imagine that an institution built on prayer and salvation, yet carefully preserving a book said to contain the names of hell's princes. Why? Some argue it's to keep dangerous knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. Others suspect the Church has studied it, needing to understand the darkness it so often claims to battle. Of course, there is no official confirmation. The Vatican denies its existence. But then again, denial is the most efficient form of secrecy. Ask yourself, if the Grand Grimoire were real, would you expect any institution to admit to keeping it? Pause for a moment. Picture the archives themselves. 53 miles of shelving, stretching like arteries beneath the city. Wooden boxes sealed with wax, dust motes floating in the air like tiny ghosts. Somewhere in that endless maze, imagine a single volume bound in cracked leather, its edges blackened as if it had once tasted fire. the cover heavy with symbols you can't quite decipher, but your skin prickles when your eyes trace them too long. Would you touch it? Would you dare to read aloud even a single line? Legends say the book's most dangerous ritual is not about summoning demons, but about control. It outlines how a mortal might compel Lucifer to appear, and then bind him with words, forcing obedience. Think about that for a moment. The paradox of a human being who for a fleeting instant holds more power than the ruler of hell himself. The temptation is staggering, and perhaps that is the true danger. Not that the rituals work, but that they convince men they can. And men intoxicated with the idea of absolute power are often more destructive than demons. Now, here's the twist that almost no one talks about. In 1750, a Frenchman named Antonio del Rio claimed to have handled a copy of the Grand Grimoire while cataloging the library of a noble family. His notes describe pages flecked with red ink. He insisted it was blood outlining sacrifices and promises written in archaic Latin. Soon after his report, the copy vanished. Some say it was seized by church agents. Others whisper it burned mysteriously in a fire that consumed the noble's estate. Yet, within a year, Del Rio himself fell into disgrace, accused of heresy and fraud. Coincidence or cleanup? And think about this. Europe in the 18th century was no stranger to dangerous books. Across the continent, authorities hunted and burned grimoires, banned alchemical texts, censored works that smelled of heresy. But the Grand Grimoire has a way of slipping past the flames, always resurfacing, always whispered about. That kind of survival suggests not just fiction, but obsession. If you stand in St. Peter's Square today, surrounded by pilgrims and tourists, you'd never guess that somewhere beneath your feet, this book might lie in darkness. Yet, the idea has haunted writers, occultists, and even musicians for centuries. Heavy metal bands in the 1970s borrowed its name. Novelists wove it into their plots. Conspiracy theorists insist global elites still consult its pages. The line between myth and memory has blurred so completely that perhaps it no longer matters. The Grand Grimoire lives not just in archives, but in imagination. And sometimes, imagination is the most powerful archive of all. But here's the unsettling question. If the Vatican really does keep such a book locked away, then it is not ignorance that protects us. It is a decision. Someone, somewhere, chose to guard this knowledge rather than destroy it. And in that choice lies a truth we can't easily escape. What is hidden is often considered more valuable than what is revealed. And that, my friend, is only the first secret. Part 2. UFO in the Vatican sky. Picture this. It's the late 1930s. Italy is under the iron hand of Benito Mussolini. The streets of Milan bustle with workers, black shirts march in tight formation, and the clouds above feel heavy, as if war itself is pressing down. The world hasn't yet erupted into the global firestorm of World War II, but the air smells of oil, iron, and fear. And then, in this atmosphere of control and paranoia, the sky tears open with something no one can explain. A disk of metal, glowing faintly as the dusk swallows the horizon, falls near the town of Magenta, not far from Milan. Locals whisper about it for weeks. Some say it looked like a fiery chariot. Others swear it was a craft, smooth and seamless, unlike any airplane of the era. And Mussolini, ever the dictator obsessed with power, seizes on the event instantly. He orders silence. The wreckage, according to some testimonies, is hauled away under the cover of night. Soldiers sworn to secrecy guard the site. Italy, a country already standing at the edge of chaos, hides a secret from the world. Decades later, a man named David Grush, former U.S. Air Force intelligence officers, hakes that silence wide open. In interviews, he claims not only that UFOs exist, but that the Vatican itself once held the remains of this mysterious craft. He alleges that Pope Pius X secretly informed the United States after the war, allowing the wreckage to be transferred across the Atlantic into the hands of American intelligence. Think about that for a moment. We are not talking about Roswell in 1947, the story everyone knows. We're talking about Italy in the late 1930s, a crash before the nuclear age, before jets had even dominated the skies. If true, this would make it the earliest modern case of an alleged recovered UFO and one tied directly to the Vatican. Now, ask yourself, why would the Vatican, a spiritual authority, involve itself in something as strange and worldly as a crashed flying object? Perhaps because nothing threatens or redefines faith, quite like proof of life beyond Earth. Imagine the theological earthquake. If beings exist on other planets, what does that mean for the story of creation, for the image of man as God's favored child? The Vatican, always cautious, may have believed it safer to study in silence rather than allow panic or heresy to spread. But secrecy cuts both ways. According to Grush, the Vatican's involvement wasn't just about safeguarding faith, it was about power. By alerting the Americans, Pope Pius XI may have secured an invisible bargain, trading access to this technology for political influence and protection. Italy was in ruins after the war. The Church needed allies. What better way than offering a gift so extraordinary that no government could ignore it? Of course, skeptics dismiss Grush's claims as fantasy. No official documents confirm the story. No photographs of the wreckage have surfaced. But here's the twist. Grush insists he has spoken to people directly involved in the recovery, people whose names he cannot reveal because their identities remain classified. That detail, that quiet invocation of hidden witnesses, mirrors the very style of Vatican secrecy itself. Layers of testimony with no paper trail, shadows in place of proof. Let's step back for a moment. What was Mussolini's Italy like at the time of the alleged crash? It was a nation drunk on fascist spectacle. Mussolini demanded grand parades, endless propaganda, and the appearance of strength. If such a craft had fallen near Milan, he would not have ignored it. He might have thought, here lies a weapon, a chance to rival Hitler, a way to seize the skies. But here's the irony. By the 1940s, Mussolini's military technology was lagging. Italy's planes, though numerous, were no match for Allied designs. Could a UFO wreck have been his imagined ticket to power? If so, it never materialized. Italy still crumbled, still fell. And yet, the Vatican's alleged role changes the entire flavor of the story. Because Mussolini may have hidden the wreckage, but the Vatican, according to Grushwas, the one that whispered it into America's ear. Imagine Pope Pius X, in the years just after the war, sitting with envoys, confiding not just in matters of faith, but in something that might shatter faith altogether. There was a craft. We kept it hidden. Take it. Study it. Do not let the world know. Now, fast forward to June 2007, St. Peter's Basilica, glowing under the Roman sun. Above it, dozens of witnesses claim to see a silver-orange disk hovering silently, its surface pulsing like metal heated to a forge's glow. It lingers, drifts, and then vanishes in a blink. Photographs surface on obscure forms. For days, whispers spread. And then, silence. The stories disappear. News outlets drop the coverage. No Vatican statement, no confirmation, no denial. Just absence, as if the event itself had been erased. What do you make of that? One sighting might be dismissed as a weather balloon, but when the Vatican sky has now twice become the stage for unexplained machines, the mind starts to wonder. Perhaps the 1930s crash wasn't an isolated story. Perhaps it was only the beginning. Here's where the imagination sharpens into fear. If the Vatican has indeed kept secrets about UFOs for nearly a century, what does that mean about the rest of its archives? We already know they stretch over 50 miles of shelving. We know that only a fraction is accessible to scholars. We know that fragments of forbidden gospels, letters from doomed queens, and transcripts of trials lie hidden in their vaults. If a crashed craft or even fragments were brought there, who would ever know? And more importantly, who would ever be allowed to? And here's the darkest question. What if the Vatican has not only safeguarded these artifacts, but studied them? Imagine a clandestine team of priests and scientists poring over twisted alloys and strange hieroglyphs etched into the wreckage. A Jesuit physicist whispering, "This metal should not exist." A bishop quietly recording, "We must never let this be known." The faithful would not understand. A secret symbiosis between faith and science, hidden away beneath centuries-old walls. Skeptics will tell you, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and they're right. Grush offers no photographs, no documents, only testimony. But secrecy thrives precisely in that vacuum. It leaves room for belief, for suspicion, for imagination to coil itself around possibility. And in that space between proof and denial, the Vatican is most at home. It has mastered silence for centuries. Why should UFOs be any different? As you sit here, listening in the quiet, maybe the hum of your fan blending with the night, let yourself wonder. The Vatican has weathered empires, revolutions, plagues, and wars. It has survived by controlling what is seen and what is not. If they chose to keep such a secret, they must believe it is too dangerous or too powerful to share. And that, more than the craft itself, is terrifying. Because sometimes the true mystery isn't whether a UFO crashed in Italy, or hovered above Rome, or rests in some hidden vault. Sometimes the true mystery is this: why do those in power decide you don't deserve to know? And that is a question we will carry deeper into the shadows. Part 3. The Vatican's Time Machine. Imagine a small room hidden within the Vatican in the 1960s. The Cold War looms overhead like a thundercloud. Nuclear drills echo in school halls. Berlin is split by a wall, and spies trade secrets in alleyways across the world. In this atmosphere of paranoia and invention, the Vatican, too, whispers about a secret projectome, not of missiles or satellites, but of time itself. A device called the chronovisor. The story begins with Father Pellegrino Ernetti, an Italian Benedictine monk, musician, and exorcist. He was not a crank by any measure. He was respected in his field, a scholar of sacred music, fluent in Gregorian chant, a man of discipline. Yet he claimed that in the 1960s he joined a clandestine group of priests and scientists, gathered in secrecy, working under the Vatican's wing. Their task? To build a machine that could peer into the past as if history itself were recorded on film. Picture the room. Brass panels gleaming under dim light, wires coiled like veins, a screen flickering with static. The chronovisor, they said, functioned like a television tuned not to a channel, but to a time. You didn't travel through history, you watched it. You saw it play out before you, like a silent witness. Father Ernetti claimed he had stood before the device and watched the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, not a metaphor, not a dream. He said he saw Christ himself on the cross, the air thick with suffering and prayer. He even claimed to have taken a photograph of that moment, and for years, whispers say, that photograph circulated, grainy, haunting, depicting a man nailed to wood, his face twisted in agony. Skeptics later revealed the image matched a crucifix statue from an Italian church. A forgery, they argued. But even so, the legend persisted. Because the story was never about one photograph. It was about the audacity of the claim that the Vatican might possess the ability to replay time itself. Think about what that means. If such a machine existed, it could shatter every debate in history. No more questions about who killed Julius Caesar you could simply watch. No more disputes about lost gospels or contested relics. Dial back, observe, confirm. Wars could be replayed. Kings could be stripped of their myths. Lies and legends exposed. History finally laid bare. But here's the shadow that follows. Such a device would not only reveal the past, it could also be used to manipulate it. If you can present a recording of Jesus saying something new, who could argue with you? If you could show a vision of a saint or an emperor in triumph, who would dare deny it? The chronovisor, if real, would not just be a window into history. It would be the most powerful tool of propaganda ever conceived. Father Ernetti himself admitted this. He warned that the device was dangerous, that in the wrong hands it could rewrite the past not in truth, but in illusion. Imagine governments showing evidence of their divine right to rule. Imagine regimes replaying doctored visions to inspire obedience. If history is the bedrock of identity, then to control its replay is to control the soul of humanity. But let's return to Ernetti. His story does not vanish easily. In interviews before his death in 1994, he never renounced it. He insisted the chronovisor existed, that it was built, used, and then dismantled out of fear. He said the Vatican itself ordered it taken apart, stored away in secrecy, lest its power be abused. And here's where the threads tighten. In 1988, the Vatican issued a curious decree. Any person caught using a device capable of predicting the future or viewing the past would face excommunication. Officially, it was a blanket ban on occult practices, but to those who knew of Ernetti's claims, it felt like confirmation. Why outlaw what does not exist? Pause here. Close your eyes and imagine standing before such a machine. You are handed controls, dials etched with years and places. The hum of electricity fills the chamber. You set the machine to the year 44 BCE. The screen flickers. Rome. You watch the Senate chamber, Caesar rising to his feet, the knives flashing like cold stars. You hear the cry, "Et tu, brute," and see the blood-stained marble steps. You reset the dial. The 79 CE. Pompeii. Ash rains from the sky as families clutch one another in the final moments before the fire swallows them whole. Reset again. 1914, Sarajevo. A bullet cracks through silence and the Great War begins. Do you see the danger now? A church or a state with such a device could hold not just faith, but history itself in its grip. And history, controlled, is power absolute. Of course, skeptics argue Father Ernetti fabricated the story. They say he invented the chronovisor to boost his reputation or to distract from scandal. They point out the photo hoax, the lack of evidence, the impossibility of such a machine. But what makes the story enduring is not whether it's provable. It's that it fits so neatly into the Vatican's centuries-old aura of secrecy. A place that already guards forbidden manuscripts, lost gospels, relics of uncertain origin. Why not a machine, too? And think about the timing. The 1960s were an age of scientific miracles. Satellites pierced space, DNA was unraveled, computers began to blink awake. If ever there was a time when belief in a time machine might seem plausible, it was then. And if ever there was an institution with the motive to hide such an invention, it was the Vatican. Let's add one more layer. Some researchers claim Ernetti was not the only one to speak of the chronovisor. A French priest, François Brun, later claimed he too had seen fragments of its design and heard testimonies from others who worked on it. Brun said it was not just the Vatican involved, it was a collaboration with unnamed European scientists, possibly even physicists tied to CERN's early projects. A bridge between faith and science, bound together in shadows. If true, it would mean the Vatican was not guarding a medieval relic, but a mid-20th century invention born in the fevered heart of the atomic age. Now let me pull you into a darker thought experiment. Imagine the chronovisor was never dismantled. Imagine it still hums quietly in a chamber beneath the apostolic palace, its dials untouched for decades. What would happen if tomorrow morning the Pope announced its existence? Would believers flood the city, demanding proof of the crucifixion? Would skeptics demand footage of the Big Bang? Would governments beg for evidence of their founding myths? Or would the revelation tear reality apart, forcing us to admit that history is no longer a narrative shaped by discovery, but a spectacle dictated by whoever controls the machine? Father Ernetti took his secrets to the grave. If the chronovisor existed, it may now be gathering dust in silence, its components scattered, its memory erased. Or perhaps it still waits, locked in a vault deeper than any archive, beyond the reach of scholars, guarded by walls that never yield. The Vatican, after all, has always known the value of mystery. Sometimes silence is not about ignorance. Sometimes it is about control. And so we are left with a story that feels less like a lie and more like a riddle. A story that, whether true or false, captures the essence of the Vatican itself, a place where history and myth intertwine, where truth is guarded not by proof, but by the decision of who gets to see it. The question, then, is not whether the chronovisor was real. The question is, if it were, would you dare to look? Part 4. City of the Dead. Close your eyes for a moment and picture St. Peter's Basilica as it is today. Sunlight pours through vast stained glass windows. Marble pillars stretch like frozen trees into the dome above. Pilgrims shuffle forward in hushed awe, their voices swallowed by the immensity of the space. Tourists snap photographs. Priests in white robes glide past. Incense curls in the air like memory itself. It is a cathedral, alive with sound and light. But beneath that polished floor, hidden under centuries of stone, lies another world of silence, shadows, and bones. A city not for the living, but for the dead. This is the Vatican necropolis. A subterranean labyrinth where time folds back on itself, where Christianity and pagan Rome collide in the soil. The story begins in the 1940s, during renovations ordered by Pope Pius X. Workers clearing the area beneath the basilica expected little more than soil and stone. Instead, as their picks struck deeper, the ground opened into chambers, tombs, and corridors that had been forgotten for nearly 2,000 years. Imagine their shock as the dust cleared and entire mausoleums emerged from the earth. Frescoes still clinging to walls, inscriptions carved in Latin and Greek, skeletons slumbering in silence. It was not rubble. It was a city of the dead, preserved beneath the foundation of the world's most famous church. Archaeologists quickly realized what they had stumbled upon. This was no random graveyard. This was a necropolis, dating back to the 1st and 2nd centuries, CE, when Rome still ruled with iron and blood, and Christianity was a fledgling faith whispered in back alleys. These tombs held the remains of wealthy Roman families, adorned with pagan imagery, winged deities, vines curling across stone, symbols of the old gods. Yet, layer by layer, as the excavation rose toward the surface, the imagery shifted. Crosses appeared, Christian names emerged, pagan gods gave way to biblical verses. Here, under the basilica, was a timeline carved in stone, the very moment when an empire's soul began to change. Pause with me. Picture walking through that necropolis. The air is heavy, cool, tinged with the scent of damp earth. Each step echoes faintly, as though the dead themselves stir to listen. On one wall, a faded fresco shows a man dining with the gods. On the next, a small carving of a fish, the ancient Christian symbol, drawn quietly in an age of persecution. These walls are not just stone, they are witnesses. They watched as paganism waned and Christianity took its place. They embody a world in transition, caught between sacrifice to Jupiter and prayer to Christ. And in the center of it all lies a chamber unlike any other. A shrine layered with centuries of devotion. Archaeologists believe this is the resting place of none other than St. Peter himself, the apostle, the fisherman from Galilee, the man Christ called the rock upon which his church would be built. According to tradition, Peter was crucified in Rome during the reign of Emperor Nero, buried hastily in this necropolis, and venerated by early Christians who carved secret symbols above his grave. Over centuries, churches rose atop his tomb, each new basilica literally built over the bones of the first pope. The St. Peter's Basilica we see today is not merely a church. It is the final architectural layer of a shrine rising directly from the grave of Peter. But here's where the mystery deepens. In 1968, after decades of study, Pope Paul VI announced to the world that fragments of bone discovered in the shrine belonged to St. Peter. 8 small pieces, weathered and fragile, enclosed in a box, were proclaimed relics of the first pope. They have since been displayed in solemn ceremonies, even held aloft by Pope Francis during Mass. For many believers, these bones are the closest physical link to the dawn of Christianity. Yet, doubts remain. No independent scientific testing has been permitted. DNA analysis, carbon dating, chemical inspection, none of it allowed. The Church insists faith is sufficient. That proof is not the point. But the question lingers. Are these truly the bones of Peter or the remains of another man from antiquity? To the faithful, it may not matter. To historians, it is one of the great unsolved puzzles. The line between relic and rumor is razor thin. And here's an eerie detail. Some Vatican insiders whisper of a curse attached to the tomb, that any attempt to disturb it brings misfortune. Archaeologists working in the necropolis described strange accidents, sudden illnesses, tools failing without cause. Is it superstition? Or is the weight of 2,000 years of veneration so heavy that it warps even coincidence into omen? Now, let's widen our lens. Necropolises like this are not unique to Rome. Beneath Paris lies a catacomb stretching for miles, walls stacked with skulls like grim libraries of bone. In Egypt's Valley of the Kings, tombs hide beneath desert cliffs filled with treasures and curses. Yet, the Vatican necropolis is different. It is not merely a burial ground. It is a foundation. The faith of over 1 billion people today stands literally upon this city of the dead, and that truth alone sends a chill down the spine. Think of the symbolism. The basilica above shines with gold and light, its dome reaching for heaven, but it is built upon graves, shadows, death. The living worship above while the dead whisper below. It is as if the Church itself admits, in stone and silence, that resurrection cannot exist without burial. Faith cannot exist without loss. Glory cannot exist without death. Now imagine you are there. You descend a narrow passage, torchlight flickering on plaster walls. The noise of the basilica fades until all you hear is your own breath. You stop before a small niche. Inside, a handful of bones rest, worn and pale, fragments of a man who may have walked beside Christ. Your fingers itch to reach forward, to touch history itself, but a guard steps closer, his voice a whisper. No photographs, no samples, no questions. The silence is louder than any denial. In that moment, you understand the Vatican's greatest power is not in what it shows, but in what it refuses to reveal. So, the necropolis remains, partly open to guided tours, yet largely sealed. A place where archaeologists still debate, where pilgrims kneel, where history itself blurs into faith. Beneath one of the most famous buildings on earth lies a secret city, a place that reminds us that empires rise, religions shift, and time buries everything in silence. But sometimes, silence does not mean absence. Sometimes silence is the most eloquent witness of all. And that is the city of the dead beneath the Vatican. Part 5. The Death of a Pope. It is the night of September 28, 1978. The Vatican City sleeps beneath a canopy of stars. Windows glow faintly in the papal apartments where a man sits alone at his desk. He is Albino Luciani, newly elected Pope John Paul I. Only 33 days have passed since white smoke rose above the Sistine Chapel to announce his election. In that short span, the world has grown to love him. The smiling Pope, they call him, gentle, humble, a man who carried himself with a simplicity that felt disarmingly human in a city of marble and grandeur. But tonight, his smile has faded. Papers are scattered across his desk, reports, letters, documents heavy with secrets. He's been reading long into the night, eyes shadowed, lips pressed thin. He whispers a prayer, closes his eyes, and drifts to sleep. By morning, he will be dead. And with his death, one of the greatest Vatican mysteries of the 20th century will be born. The official account is simple. Pope John Paul III died of a heart attack in his sleep. He was discovered at dawn by a nun bringing his morning coffee. No autopsy was ever performed. Within hours, the Vatican announced the news to the world, and mourning began. But from the very beginning, cracks appeared in the story. Conflicting statements emerged about who found the body. Some said it was the nun. Others said it was his personal secretary. Even the details of how he was lying, whether holding papers, whether his glasses were on-shifted with each retelling. For a church known for its order and precision, the confusion felt unsettling. Too messy, too human, or perhaps too suspicious. And then came the rumors. Pope John Paul II had been reading files connected to the Vatican Bank, an institution long dogged by whispers of corruption, money laundering, and ties to organized crime. The bank's president at the time, Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, was entangled with figures from the Italian financial underworld. Names like Roberto Calvi, the so-called God's banker, who would himself later be found hanging beneath Blackfriars Bridge in London in what many still consider a mob-style execution. Was John Paul II preparing to act? Was he planning to purge the Vatican of corruption? Some claim he had already drawn up plans to remove Marcinkus and restructure the bank. But he never got the chance. Here lies the heart of the conspiracy, that John Paul I was murdered, silenced before he could dismantle a network of power too vast to confront. 33 days long enough to glimpse the rot, too short to fight it. His sudden death, to many, feels less like tragedy and more like inevitability. Pause here. Picture that papal apartment, the lamp still burning, papers strewn across the desk. What secrets lay on those pages? Were they harmless reports or damning evidence of corruption? Imagine reaching out, fingertips brushing documents that could unravel alliances between church, state, and crime. And then imagine someone deciding those documents must never see daylight. What is one man's life weighed against centuries of power? The suspicions multiplied in the years that followed. John Cornwell's book, A Thief in the Night, laid out inconsistencies in the Vatican's handling of the death. Investigative journalist David Yallop went further, outright accusing the Vatican of murder in God's name. His claims were explosive. That John Paul II had stumbled upon a list of Vatican officials secretly linked to Freemasonry, a list he intended to act upon. That his reformist agenda threatened not just the bank, but the very structure of Vatican power, that he had to be stopped. The Vatican dismissed these accusations, but the seeds of doubt had already taken root. And here's where the irony cuts deep. John Paul II had taken the papacy with the intention of returning to humility, simplicity, transparency. He rejected many of the trappings of papal luxury. He wanted to live as a shepherd, not a monarch. And yet, it is precisely his openness, his willingness to confront uncomfortable truths that may have cost him his life. A man who smiled too warmly, who trusted too openly, who underestimated the shadows around him. Let's add one more layer. In 1982, just 4 years later, Italy was rocked by the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, a financial empire deeply tied to the Vatican Bank. Millions vanished. Executives died mysteriously. Roberto Calvi's body swung beneath Blackfriars Bridge, pockets stuffed with bricks, his death staged as a warning. The scandal revealed a tangled web of politics, finance, and organized crime, with threads leading straight back to the Vatican. To this day, historians wonder, if John Paul I had lived, would the scandal have been prevented? Or was he already ensnared in a game too dangerous to escape? Now, let me bring you into the scene. Imagine you are one of the Swiss guards stationed outside the papal apartments that night. The halls are silent, echoing with the tick of ancient clocks. The Vatican never truly sleeps, but it drowses. You hear faint footsteps, then silence. A door creaks, perhaps a whisper, perhaps nothing at all. By dawn, you are told the Pope is dead, and you are sworn to silence. You will never speak of that night again. Skeptics argue the conspiracy theories are unnecessary. John Paul I was 65, small of frame, with a history of poor health. The stress of his new role may have overwhelmed him. His death could have been natural, a simple tragedy wrapped in too much speculation. But even if that were true, the Vatican's own handling of the aftermath, its contradictions, its refusal to perform an autopsy, its hurried burial did nothing to quiet suspicion. In secrecy, even truth begins to smell of lies. Today, his papacy remains the shortest in modern history. 33 days, a biblical number, some say, echoing the years of Christ's life. A coincidence or a quiet symbol? In 2017, Pope Francis declared John Paul I venerable, moving him one step closer to sainthood. His smile is once again celebrated, his humility honored. Yet the questions linger like shadows in candlelight. Was he a martyr to reform, or simply a man taken too soon? Was his death a natural end, or the Vatican's darkest secret? As you sit now in the quiet of your own room, think about this. Power is rarely surrendered willingly. Institutions built over centuries do not crumble overnight, and men who threaten them often do not live to tell their story. Perhaps John Paul I was simply unlucky. Or perhaps his fate was sealed the moment he picked up those papers and realized the church he loved was built on, more than faith, it was built on secrets. And so, the mystery of the 33-day Pope remains. A smile extinguished, a reform unfinished, a question unanswered. In the Vatican, where silence reigns supreme, perhaps that was always the plan. Part 6. The Obelisk of Blood. Stand in St. Peter's Square on a bright morning. Tourists spill across the cobblestones like scattered beads, their cameras tilted upward. The colonnades curl like marble arms embracing the crowd. And at the very center, rising defiantly against the Roman sky, stands a single block of stone, ancient, silent, unyielding. This is the Egyptian obelisk, older than Christianity itself, a relic dragged across empires, baptized in blood, and set at the very heart of Catholic power. Look at it closely. 40 meters tall, carved from red granite, its surface stripped of hieroglyphs by time and weather. It does not whisper like a relic of faith. It looms, cold and foreign, like a prisoner stolen from another world. And in truth, it was. For this obelisk was born not in Rome, but on the banks of the Nile, when the pharaohs still ruled and pyramids pierced the horizon. It once stood in Heliopolis, city of the sun god Ra, catching the desert light like a frozen ray of dawn. Its journey to Rome began under Emperor Caligula in the 1st century CE. Obsessed with grandeur, he demanded Egyptian monuments be uprooted and shipped across the sea. Imagine the effort, thousands of men hauling ropes, ships creaking under impossible weight, waves battering against hulls. When at last it arrived, the obelisk was planted in the Circus of Nero, a racetrack where blood stained the sand. Here, beneath its shadow, Christians were executed. According to tradition, it was at this very circus that St. Peter was crucified upside down. The obelisk, then, is no mere stone. It is a witness to martyrdom, a silent spectator to agony. Think about that. The central monument of St. Peter's Square once stood beside the death of Peter himself. It is not simply history. It is a symbol of power reclaimed. The Church has set the stone of its enemy as its own centerpiece, turning a relic of pagan sun worship into the spine of its most sacred square. It is both triumph and irony, glory and shadow. Fast forward to 1586. Pope Sixtus V orders the obelisk moved from the ruins of Nero's circus to its present position in St. Peter's Square. The task is monumental. Hundreds of horses strain at ropes. Workmen sweat under the sun. Crowds gather to watch. Legend says the Pope threatened death to any worker who disobeyed orders, for the risk of failure was immense. The obelisk could shatter, lives could be lost, silence was demanded from all. But as the ropes strained, one sailor cried out, "Water on the ropes!" The hemp had begun to smoke from the friction. The order saved the day. Instead of execution, the sailor was rewarded. And the obelisk rose, inch by inch, until it stood upright once more, reborn in the heart of Christendom. But here's where the shadow lingers. This obelisk has drunk deeply of blood. Early Christians died under its gaze. Executions echoed at its base. And when it was replanted in St. Peter's Square, Pope Sixtus V had an exorcism performed upon it, as though to drive out the spirits of Egypt and Rome. A cross was mounted on its tip, said to contain a fragment of the true cross itself. Yet, even with that Christian crown, the obelisk remains unsettling. A pagan monument, a foreign god's pillar, a survivor of empires, it does not belong, yet it dominates. Pause with me. Imagine standing before it at night, the square empty, the lamps dim. The obelisk looms like a spear against the stars. Wind brushes across the cobblestones. You realize you are staring at something that has seen more history than entire nations. It stood when pharaohs ruled, when Caesars reigned, when popes whispered in candlelight, and it will stand long after we are gone. The stone does not care for prayers or politics. It only endures. But why keep it here? Why place a monument of pagan origin at the heart of Catholicism? Some argue it is an act of triumph, the Church proving it can claim even the symbols of its enemies. Others whisper of deeper meaning, that the obelisk is not merely decoration, but part of a hidden design. Conspiracy theorists point to the geometry of St. Peter's Square, to the way the colonnades curve like open arms. They say the obelisk is not random, but a marker in a larger map and echo of ancient sun worship encoded into Christian architecture. To them, the Vatican has not erased paganism, but absorbed it, using its symbols to weave a new empire of faith. And here's a strange detail. In the 16th century, when the obelisk was re-erected, Pope Sixtus had inscribed upon its base a warning in Latin, "Behold the cross of the Lord, flee, ye adversaries," as if to declare to demons and shadows alike that the obelisk no longer belonged to Ra or to Rome. It belonged to Christ. Yet, the stone itself remains mute. Does it bow to the cross, or does it quietly remember the blood it once drank? Now, widen your vision. Obelisks stand in other cities too: Paris, London, New York, Washington. Each uprooted from Egypt, each replanted in the heart of another empire. It is as if the obelisk is the ultimate trophy of power, stolen from one civilization to crown another. In this sense, the Vatican is not unique. But here, in St. Peter's Square, the obelisk's placement carries a sharper irony. It watches over pilgrims who kneel before the tomb of the man martyred beneath its shadow. It binds together victim and victor, faith and empire, death and resurrection. And so the obelisk endures. Millions pass it every year without knowing its story. They see only stone, not the centuries of death and devotion it embodies. But if you pause, if you let your eyes linger, you may feel it. A presence, a weight, a memory too old to fade. It is not a relic of faith, it is a relic of power. And in the Vatican, those two have always been inseparable. That is why they call it the Obelisk of Blood. Part 7. Bones of the First Pope. Imagine standing inside St. Peter's Basilica, the dome rising like a heaven of stone above you. Beneath that dome lies the high altar, a canopy of bronze twisted into spirals by Bernini's genius. Pilgrims kneel before it, unaware, or perhaps half aware that directly below, deeper than their prayers can reach, lies a shrine built around fragments of bone. The Vatican declares, these are the bones of St. Peter himself, the fisherman from Galilee, the man Christ called the rock upon which his church would be built. If true, this is not just a relic. It is the very foundation of Catholicism made flesh and bone. The story of these bones begins in secrecy. In the 1940s, while the world was tearing itself apart in war, Pope Pius X quietly authorized excavations beneath the basilica. Archaeologists unearthed the necropolis, that city of the dead we explored earlier. And in its heart, they found a modest tomb marked with graffiti. Petros Any Peter is here. Inside, bones rested, worn and brittle, their identity uncertain. For decades, the Vatican said little, allowing whispers to grow like ivy in the shadows. Then, in 1968, Pope Paul VI stunned the world. He announced that fragments discovered in the shrine were indeed the remains of St. Peter. 8 pieces of bone, pale and fragile, were proclaimed sacred. They were placed in a bronze reliquary, guarded in silence and displayed only in rare ceremonies. The faithful rejoiced. The rock of the church had been found. But doubts, like shadows, clung to the story. Scholars asked, where was the proof? No DNA testing was allowed, no carbon dating. The bones were declared sacred and thus beyond the touch of science. For some, this silence was enough. Faith does not require proof. Yet for others, the refusal felt deliberate, a way of protecting belief from scrutiny. What if the bones were not Peter's? What if they belonged to another Roman buried in the necropolis? What if the rock upon which the church was built was, in fact, just stone? Consider the irony. In a world obsessed with evidence, the Vatican insists on mystery. To believe in Peter's bones is to accept that some truths cannot be weighed or measured. But what if secrecy hides something else? What if the Vatican itself is unsure? That possibility chills more than denial. Pause with me. Picture the reliquary being carried into the light during a rare ceremony. Pope Francis himself once held it aloft, its glass catching the glow of candles. Thousands of eyes watched, tears on many faces. Some saw faith incarnate, the bridge to Christ himself. Others saw theater, a gesture without proof. Both groups were right in their own way. For relics do not derive power from what they are, but from what people believe them to be. Let's widen the view. Christianity is not alone in guarding sacred bones. The Buddha's relics are divided across temples in Asia. Muhammad's hair and cloak are treasured in Istanbul. Even secular heroes Lenin, Mao, Napoleon lie embalmed in mausoleums, their remains serving as physical anchors of ideology. Human beings crave presence. We want to touch history, to believe it is not lost. Bones, fragile as they are, become vessels for eternity. But bones also carry danger. Too many splinters of the true cross exist for all to be genuine. Too many saints' fingers, skulls, and hearts circulate across Europe. Relics inspire faith, but they also invite fraud. And fraud invites doubt. If the Church has ever knowingly blurred the line, what else might it conceal? There's another unsettling layer. Some Vatican insiders whisper that multiple sets of bones were found in Peter's shrine, scattered across chambers. One box contained the remains of a woman, another of a young man. Were these companions? Intruders? Mistakes? The Church remains silent. Only the 8 fragments displayed are acknowledged. The rest lie in the archives, hidden, unspoken. Silence, once again, is the strongest wall. And then there is the curse. Archaeologists working in the necropolis described accidents and illnesses. Tools broke unexpectedly. A collapse nearly killed a worker. Superstition grows quickly in places of death. Some insist the bones do not want to be disturbed, that Peter's rest should remain inviolate. Others shrug it off as chance. But when chance repeats itself too often, it begins to feel like omen. Now imagine this scene. You are among the chosen few, descending into the Vatican's depths. The air cools. The marble above fades into rough stone. You reach a small chamber, the shrine glowing with faint lamplight. A bronze box rests on an altar. You lean close. Through glass, you glimpse bone-thin, splintered, yellow with age. You realize you are looking at what may be the remains of the man who once walked with Jesus, who once denied him 3 times, who once became the cornerstone of the faith that now commands billions. The weight of history presses into your chest. You feel awe and doubt and fear all at once. A guard clears his throat. You step back. The reliquary is lifted away, and the silence returns. Here's the paradox. Whether the bones belong to Peter or not almost doesn't matter. For 2 millennia, Christians have believed they rest there. Belief itself has made it true, shaping ritual, architecture, empire. The basilica, the papacy, the pilgrimages all rise from that faith. And faith, after all, is not about proof. It is about surrender to mystery. But to skeptics, that surrender is dangerous. It allows secrecy to flourish. It allows institutions to shape truth without evidence. It allows shadows to masquerade as light. And so, the bones of Peter remain in their reliquary, both revered and doubted, both sacred and contested. Pilgrims kneel above them every day, while tourists walk unaware. They lie not just as relics of faith, but as symbols of a larger tension between what is seen and what is hidden, what is believed and what is known. Perhaps one day science will be allowed to test them. Perhaps the Church will guard them forever in silence. Either way, the bones remain what they have always been, a mirror. To the faithful, they reflect certainty. To the doubters, they reflect doubt. To history, they reflect the truth that even the smallest fragment can hold the weight of a world. And so, the bones of the first pope still sleep beneath the Vatican. Whether they are truly his or simply adopted into his legend, they remind us of one thing. Faith often chooses silence over answers, and silence in its own way can be louder than any voice. Part 8. A prisoner in his own kingdom. Imagine being a monarch whose palace is vast, whose treasury is deep, whose authority stretches across continents, and yet you cannot leave your own gates. You are walled in, trapped not by chains but by politics, watching the world change while you pace the same courtyards day after day. This was the fate of the popes for nearly 60 years in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They were called the prisoners of the Vatican. The story begins in 1870, when the Kingdom of Italy seized Rome. For centuries, the Pope had been both a spiritual leader and a temporal ruler, governing the papal states that stretched across central Italy. But unification swept that power away. The tricolor flag of Italy replaced papal banners, soldiers marched through the Eternal City, and Pope Pius the Furious, humiliated, declared himself a prisoner within the walls of the Vatican. From that moment, popes refused to recognize the legitimacy of the Italian state. They locked themselves inside the Vatican, venturing no further than the Leonine walls. Official audiences ceased. Carriages stood unused. For the faithful, the Pope's absence from Rome's streets was jarring. For the popes themselves, it was a kind of living entombment. Pause here. Picture the apostolic palace in those years. The hallways echo with silence, curtains drawn tight. A pope walks in solitude, his slippers whispering against marble. Outside the walls, Rome grows into a modern capital, trams clattering, crowds shouting, the hum of industry rising. But inside, time feels frozen. The Vatican, once a stage for power, becomes a gilded cage. And yet, even in imprisonment, the popes remained powerful. If anything, their mystique deepened. To the faithful, the idea of the Holy Father under siege transformed him into a symbol of resistance. To politicians, his silence was unnerving. No treaties, no handshakes, no compromises. The Pope was there, but not theirs. His refusal to leave the Vatican turned absence into defiance. One of the strangest consequences was the creation of what came to be known as the Roman Question. Who ruled Rome, Italy, or the Pope? Diplomats argued, pamphlets raged, and yet the popes remained locked in. In a way, the prison was voluntary. No guard prevented them from walking out. But to step into Rome would have meant recognizing the Italian state, and that they refused. So they stayed inside decade after decade, watching through barred windows as the modern world raced by. Imagine that psychological weight. You are the successor of St. Peter, shepherd of 1 billion souls, yet you cannot walk to the river Tiber. You cannot bless the people in the streets. Your kingdom shrinks to 0.44 square kilometers. Faith stretches across oceans, but your own feet are bound by walls. It is monarchy turned inside out, sovereign of the world, prisoner in your own house. The standoff continued until 1929, when Benito Mussolini, the same dictator who would later ally with Hitler, brokered the Lateran Treaty. The treaty recognized the Vatican City as an independent sovereign state, distinct from Italy. In exchange, the popes formally gave up claims to the lost papal states. With the stroke of a pen, the Roman question was resolved, the cage was opened, the prisoners were free. But ask yourself, was it truly freedom? The popes regained sovereignty? Yes. The Vatican became a state with passports, currency, and flags. Yet, in that recognition, the Church also surrendered its temporal empire. The papal states were gone forever. What remained was influence, spiritual and political, but no longer territorial. The prison ended, but the price was steep. The papacy would never again rule vast swaths of land. Now, step into the shoes of a pilgrim in those years before 1929. You travel from afar, eager to see the Pope, only to be told he does not appear, does not leave, does not bless from balconies. You wander St. Peter's Square, staring up at shuttered windows. You imagine him behind them, silent, watching. The absence feels heavier than presence. You ask yourself, what does it mean when the shepherd hides from his flock? The phrase, prisoner of the Vatican, lingers today as more than a historical curiosity. It embodies a paradox, that power can be absolute and yet constrained, spiritual and yet political, free and yet bound. The popes of that era wielded influence over millions while refusing to step beyond their own gates. Their silence spoke louder than speeches. Their absence filled Rome with a presence more haunting than their physical touch. Of course, not everyone believed the imprisonment was noble. Critics accused the popes of melodrama, of choosing isolation over compromise. They argued that the Church could have adapted, embraced a smaller but freer role. But the popes saw it differently. To leave their walls was to concede. And in the Vatican, concession is rarely written into the script of history. So the years stretched. Pius IX, Leo IX, Pius X, Benedict XV, all lived as prisoners, all carried the burden of sovereignty, stripped and dignity wounded. And then, with Mussolini's treaty, the door opened. The Vatican became what it remains today, the smallest independent state in the world, but with influence far beyond its borders. The cage was gone, but the memory remained. Think of it this way. The Vatican's walls are not just stone. They are symbols. They can protect, or they can confine. For nearly 60 years they did both, and in that paradox lies the truth of the papacy itself. The Pope is always free, yet always bound. Bound by tradition, by secrecy, by the weight of 2,000 years. The prison of the Vatican may have ended in 1929, but in another sense, perhaps it never ended at all. Part 9. The Shroud as a Certificate Picture. A long linen cloth, faintly stained, lying beneath glass in a dimly lit chapel. At first glance, it seems unremarkable, yellowed with age, folded in creases, its fabric fragile. But as your eyes adjust, an image emerges, the shadowy imprint of a man's face, elongated, serene, eyes closed in death. A body, front and back, faint but unmistakable. The marks of nails at hands and feet, the wound in the side, the crown of thorns pressed into the brow. For centuries, millions have believed this is not merely a cloth, it is the burial shroud of Jesus Christ. This is the Shroud of Turin. Its history is as tangled as the weave of the linen itself. The earliest clear record dates back to the 1350s, when it appeared in the small French village of Lirey. Pilgrims flocked to see it, claiming it bore the true likeness of Christ. But even then, doubts swirled. A local bishop denounced it as a forgery, alleging it had been painted to deceive the faithful. Yet the image did not fade. It grew only more mysterious. Unlike paint, it seemed embedded in the fibers themselves, not layered upon them. Unlike any known art of its time, it was delicate, almost photographic in its subtlety. How could medieval hands have forged such a thing? By the 16th century, the shroud was transferred to Turin, where it remains to this day, guarded in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. There, it became both relic and controversy, drawing pilgrims and skeptics alike. Wars raged, fires scorched it, repairs patched its holes, yet it survived, always, somehow, surviving. Pause for a moment. Imagine standing before it in silence. Thousands around you kneel, many weeping, whispering prayers. Yet in your own mind, questions churn. Are you looking at Christ's burial shroud, a snapshot of resurrection's aftermath? Or are you looking at a medieval forgery so perfect it defies explanation? Faith and doubt wrestle within you, just as they have for centuries. Science eventually entered the debate. In 1988, carbon dating was performed on small samples of the shroud. The results shocked the faithful. The cloth dated to between 1260 and 1390 semi-medieval, not biblical. To many, this proved it a forgery. Headlines declared the mystery solved, but almost immediately, critics attacked the testing. They argued the samples were taken from a repaired section of the cloth, contaminated by centuries of handling, smoke, and fire. They pointed out inconsistencies, pollen grains from ancient Palestine, bloodstains with human hemoglobin, three-dimensional qualities in the image that no artist of the Middle Ages could have reproduced. The debate, rather than ending, deepened. Here's the paradox. The shroud resists every category. Too complex to be easily faked, too unprovable to be confirmed. It is both evidence and absence, certainty and doubt. For believers, it is a relic of the resurrection. Christ's death mask burned into linen by divine light. For skeptics, it is the greatest forgery of all time, brilliant enough to withstand centuries of scrutiny. For historians, it is a riddle, one that refuses to yield. Let's add one more layer. In the 1970s, the shroud was subjected to intense photographic analysis by the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STURP. Scientists were stunned to discover that the image contained three-dimensional information, a quality absent from paintings or photographs. The face and body could be digitally rendered in depth, as though the cloth had been draped over a real figure. No known medieval technique could have achieved this. Some began to whisper, if not a forgery, then what? Radiation? A burst of light? A divine imprint? And here, imagination steps in. Picture the moment of resurrection, not as a gentle rising, but as an explosion of energy. A body wrapped in linen, a flash of divine power so fierce it sears an image into fabric. A relic not painted, but burned into history itself. The shroud is a certificate of resurrection, left behind like a signature from eternity. But the shadows remain. The Vatican itself treads carefully around the shroud. It has never declared it an authentic relic of Christ, but neither has it dismissed it. Instead, it encourages veneration, leaving belief in the hands of the faithful. It is a masterstroke of ambiguity, never confirming, never denying, allowing mystery to fuel devotion. For in mystery, faith thrives. Now imagine you are one of the conservators allowed to handle the shroud during restoration. Gloved hands, dim light, the cloth laid out upon a sterile table. As you smooth its wrinkles, you feel the texture of centuries, the weight of belief pressing into your fingertips. You know the scientific controversies, the accusations of forgery. And yet, as the faint image stares back at you, something stirs in your chest. Doubt and faith merge. Even if it is not real, it has become real by the sheer force of centuries of belief. The shroud has survived fires, wars, skepticism, and science. It continues to draw millions whenever it is displayed. People kneel, cry, pray, their faith renewed by the sight of cloth and shadow. Whether authentic or forged, it has power because belief itself is power. And perhaps that is the truest secret of the shroud, that authenticity matters less than devotion. The cloth is a mirror. It reflects whatever you bring to it: faith, doubt, wonder, or suspicion. So, is the Shroud of Turin the burial cloth of Christ, or the greatest forgery ever made? The Vatican will never answer. And maybe that silence is the answer itself. For in silence, the shroud continues to live, not as proof, but as mystery. And mystery, more than certainty, is what keeps faith alive. That is why the shroud endures. A piece of linen, but also a battlefield where faith and doubt meet, where history and myth intertwine. And in that battlefield, perhaps, lies the essence of the Vatican itself. Part 10. Escape through the tunnel. Picture Rome in flames. The year is 1527, and the eternal city is collapsing under the fury of soldiers. Windows shatter, churches burn, and the streets echo with screams. The armies of the Holy Roman Emperor have breached the walls, and the sack of Rome begins. It will be remembered as one of the darkest days in papal history. Thousands will die, corpses will litter the Tiber, and the Pope himself, Clement VII, will flee for his life, scurrying through a hidden artery of stone that snakes between the Vatican and the fortress of Castel San Angelo. This passage, narrow and ancient, is called the Passetto di Borgo. At first glance, the Passetto looks unassuming, a stone corridor running atop the Vatican wall, almost blending with the city itself. But for centuries, it was the secret lifeline of popes, an escape route built not for comfort, but for survival. Its walls are thick, its ceilings low, its air cold and stale. In times of peace, it is silent. In times of danger, it becomes a lifeline, carrying the head of the Catholic Church from the heart of St. Charles Peter's to the fortified castle that looms above the river. During the sack of Rome, Clement VII ran through that passage as soldiers tore through the Vatican. Imagine his robes gathered in his hands, his slippers slapping against stone, breath ragged in his throat. Behind him, the Vatican burned. Ahead, safety beckoned, but not certainty. As he stumbled into Castel San Angelo, the walls shook with cannon fire. He would remain trapped there for months, a prisoner in his own fortress, while Rome lay bleeding. Pause here. Picture yourself in that tunnel. The air smells of damp stone. Each footstep echoes, the sound swallowed by darkness. Your torchlight flickers, shadows sliding across walls that have seen centuries of desperation. You know you are walking a path carved not for glory, but for flight. Kings may ride in gilded carriages, but popes, in their darkest hours, have run like fugitives through this narrow vein of stone. The Passetto was used more than once. In 1494, Pope Alexander VI fled through it when the French army invaded. In 1667, it was reinforced, maintained as insurance against the unpredictable storms of politics and war. For centuries, it waited, silent, patient at stones, carrying the memory of hurried footsteps, whispered prayers, and the terror of collapse. But it is not just history. The Passetto still exists today, its path occasionally open for visitors. Walking it now, you see sunlight filtering in through narrow slits, illuminating dust motes in the air. You feel the weight of its silence, the knowledge that this was where survival balanced on a blade's edge. You realize the Vatican, so often portrayed as impregnable, has always lived with the fear of sudden ruin. Here's the irony. The Vatican presents itself as eternal, unshakable, built on divine rock. But the existence of the Passetto is a confession. It admits vulnerability. It admits fear. It admits that even the highest spiritual leader on earth may one day need to run. The tunnel is not a symbol of glory. It is a symbol of fragility, of the ever-present threat that power attracts. Now, consider this. The Pasetto is only the most famous of several rumored escape routes. Conspiracies whisper of deeper tunnels, secret paths leading into Roman catacombs, passages connecting to hidden vaults beneath the Vatican gardens. Some say these were dug in the Middle Ages, others that they predate Christianity, remnants of Rome's own labyrinthine infrastructure. The Vatican admits nothing, of course. Silence, once again, is its strongest ally. But the Pasetto alone is enough to remind us that even popes must prepare to flee. Let's return to the sack of Rome for a moment. The year 1527 marked more than just devastation. It marked the collapse of illusions. The Pope, Clement VII, had believed himself untouchable, shielded by alliances, protected by God. Yet, as mercenaries stormed the city, God's chosen shepherd ran like any other man, clutching his life in his hands. Rome was reduced to horror churches desecrated, nuns assaulted, priests slaughtered. The Vatican's treasures were looted, its dignity shredded, and all the while, in his fortress, the Pope trembled behind thick walls, kept alive by the tunnel that had carried him there. That tunnel is not just a corridor of stone. It is history's quiet reminder. No power is absolute, no throne eternal. Even the mightiest must sometimes run. Pause again. Imagine walking out of the tunnel into Castel Sant'Angelo. The fortress rises above the Tiber like a brooding sentinel, originally built as Emperor Hadrian's mausoleum. Its thick walls, its spiral ramps, its chambers once designed for emperors, now shelter a frightened pope. The irony is Sharpagan tomb turned papal fortress, empire turned refuge. Clement VII paced those walls, listening to the screams of his city, knowing he could not help. The weight of failure pressed heavier than stone. Today, tourists cross the Pasetto with curiosity, snapping photos, tracing fingers along ancient walls. They marvel at the engineering, the view, the romance of history. But if you walk slowly, if you let silence fill your ears, you might hear something else. The echo of hurried footsteps, the rustle of robes, the desperate prayers of men who realize that power is never safe, never guaranteed. The Pasetto is not simply a relic, it is a scar carved into stone. The Vatican likes to present itself as unshakable, timeless, chosen. But the Pasetto tells another story, a story of fragility, a story of flight, a story of survival in the face of ruin. And perhaps that is why it still matters. Because history is not only written in triumphs, it is written in the shadows of defeat, in the tunnels we dig when the world above collapses. So, the next time you stand in St. Peter's Square, glance toward Castel Sant'Angelo. Between them lies a line of stone that has carried popes through centuries of fear. The Pasetto di Borgo, the tunnel of escape, the artery of survival. Proof that even in the heart of faith, fear carves its own path. Part 11. The Vault of Knowledge. Picture a library so vast it stretches further than your eyes can follow. The air's heavy with the scent of parchment and dust. Wooden shelves rise like ancient ribs, lined with manuscripts bound in cracked leather, their titles faded into whispers. Candles flicker, shadows creep. But you will never stand here. You will never see these books. For this is the Vatican Secret Archives. A vault of knowledge locked behind iron doors, guarded more fiercely than any treasure of gold or jewel. First, the scale. Scholars estimate the archives contain over 53 miles of shelving. Imagine walking for hours, for days, and still finding more shelves winding into the dark. Millions of documents rest here: letters, decrees, trial transcripts, diaries, ledgers. A chronicle of 2,000 years of human history, kept not in museums or universities, but in silence. Some items are harmless, even mundane. Others are explosive, capable of reshaping the way we see the past. Consider just a few. Letters from Michelangelo, demanding payment for his work on St. Peter's. Correspondence from Henry VIII, begging the Pope for annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Galileo's trial documents inked with the words that condemned him for heresy. These are known. But what of the unknown? The whispers of gospels lost, records of wars erased, testimonies hidden? If the Vatican has preserved everything, then within these walls lie not just treasures, but secrets too dangerous to release. Pause here. Imagine yourself approaching the gates of the archives. Iron bars gleam in the dim light. A guard steps forward, expression impassive. To enter, you must be a scholar with permission, your request approved months in advance, your subject limited, your time restricted. Even then, you may see only a fraction, just the document specifically granted to you. 53 miles of shelves, but your hands may touch only a few. It is knowledge kept not by accident, but by design. The secrecy has always bred suspicion. Why keep such a vault closed? Why guard knowledge as though it were a weapon? The Vatican argues it is not secrecy, but preservation, that fragile documents cannot withstand careless handling. Yet, the name itself. Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, whispers of shadows. Secretum here means private, not hidden. But in the imagination of the world, it means one thing only: secrets. And so rumors flourish. Some claim the archives hold proof that Christ did not die on the cross. Others whisper of prophecies predicting the end of the church. Some insist the truth about aliens, time travel, and forbidden gospels lies buried in these shelves. Rational minds scoff, but secrecy breeds belief. When doors remain locked, imaginations pry them open. Let's turn to a concrete example. Among the most famous documents in the archives is the trial record of the Knights Templar. Once the most powerful military order in Christendom, the Templars were accused of heresy in 1307. Their leaders burned at the stake. For centuries, conspiracy theories swirled. Had they worshipped idols, practiced occult rites, or were they framed by kings hungry for their wealth? In 2001, the Vatican released the Chinon parchment, long hidden in the archives. It revealed that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Templars of heresy even as they were being executed. The release shook historians. For centuries, the truth had lain hidden in the Vatican's vaults, while the world built legends upon lies. If one parchment can rewrite history, what might the rest conceal? Now pause and picture yourself walking those forbidden aisles. The light is dim, dust floating like tiny spirits. You stop at a box marked only with a number. Inside lies a letter no one has read in centuries. You unfold it, the ink brown with age. The words reveal a truth lost to history about kings or wars or faith itself. Your hands tremble. For in that moment, you realize the power of silence. To keep a truth hidden is to shape the story of the world. Here's another unsettling thought. The archives do not only guard the past, they guard the present. Modern documents are also locked away, sealed for decades before being released. Decisions of popes, records of scandals, evidence of abuses, all stored but hidden. In a sense, the archives are not simply a vault. They are a dam holding back floods of knowledge until the Vatican chooses to release them or not. To control history is to control memory, and to control memory is to control the future. Critics argue this secrecy is dangerous. Knowledge, they say, belongs to all, not to a few. But the Vatican counters with an older logic, that some truths, once loosed, cannot be contained. Perhaps they are right. Imagine if the archives revealed documents proving the church fabricated relics, manipulated kings, or suppressed gospels. Faith could collapse overnight. Nations could demand restitution. The fragile weave of belief could unravel. Better, perhaps, to let mysteries sleep. And yet, silence carries its own danger. For when truth is hidden, suspicion breeds. And suspicion, left unchecked, becomes conspiracy. The Vatican insists it guards knowledge for preservation. The world suspects it guards it for power. And between those two lies a gulf no document can bridge. Think of the irony. The church that once sought to spread truth across the world now locks truth away in miles of shelves. The church that urges faith in light now shelters history in shadow. And yet, perhaps this is not contradiction at all. Perhaps the church has always known that power lies not in what is revealed, but in what is withheld. So the Vatican secret archives remain. 53 miles of silence, documents that could rewrite history waiting in darkness. Scholars wait years for a glimpse. Conspiracy theorists fill the gaps. Believers bow their heads. And still the shelves grow longer, the boxes heavier, the silence deeper. Stand outside those gates in your imagination. Hear the echo of your own footsteps on marble. Know that behind the iron doors lies history itself, guarded not by locks but by silence. And ask yourself, what is more powerful, the truth itself, or the decision of who gets to see it? Part 12. The True Cross. Imagine holding in your hand a splinter of wood, small enough to fit in your palm. To the eye, it looks ordinary, edged, brown, cracked by centuries. But to the faithful, it is not ordinary at all. It is a fragment of the true cross, the very wood upon which Jesus was crucified. If real, it is not merely a relic. It is the axis of history, the timber on which salvation itself was carved. The story of the true cross begins in the 4th century with Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine. According to tradition, Helena traveled to Jerusalem in search of Christ's relics. Guided by visions, she unearthed 3 wooden crosses buried near the site of Golgotha. Unsure which was the true one, she ordered a sick woman to touch each. 2 had no effect. The 3rd healed her instantly. Helena proclaimed it the cross of Christ, and fragments of it were carried back to Constantinople in Rome. From there, splinters spread across the Christian world, enshrined in reliquaries, kissed by pilgrims, worshipped as holy. But here lies the puzzle. By the Middle Ages, the number of claimed fragments had multiplied beyond imagination. Cathedrals across Europe displayed pieces of the true cross. Monasteries guarded slivers, chips, beams. The French scholar John Calvin once quipped that if all the fragments were gathered together, they could build a ship. Skeptics laughed and still laugh at the impossibility. How could so many pieces come from one cross? Yet, faith does not count wood in pounds. To believers, each fragment carries the whole, like light reflected in countless mirrors. One splinter can embody the cross as fully as the entire beam. For faith is not arithmetic. It is symbol. Pause here. Picture entering a medieval cathedral. The air is cold, heavy with incense. At the altar, a jeweled reliquary gleams. Inside, through a sliver of glass, you glimpse wood dark, silent, unremarkable. Pilgrims kneel, weeping, pressing lips to the glass. In their minds, they are touching not wood, but salvation itself. The power is not in the relic's size, but in the belief it awakens. Of course, the Vatican claims some of the most significant fragments. One lies in the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, in Rome, said to have been brought by Helena herself. Another rests within St. Peter's Basilica, enclosed in golden reliquaries. Processions once carried these fragments through the streets, banners waving, choirs chanting, as if the wood itself had become Christ's body reborn. But the questions persist. Are these fragments authentic? Or are they products of medieval forgeries, crafted to inspire pilgrims and fill coffers? Some historians argue that demand far outstripped supply, and that enterprising monks manufactured relics to satisfy devotion. Others counter that the wood could have been divided into countless splinters, each still carrying its sacred origin. Between skepticism and faith lies the same silence we have seen in so many Vatican mysteries. Let's add a darker note. Relics were not merely objects of devotion, they were also weapons of power. A cathedral with a relic drew pilgrims, and with pilgrims came wealth. Monarchs and popes displayed relics to legitimize authority. Wars were fought over them. In the Fourth Crusade, relics of the true cross were looted from Constantinople, scattered across Europe. Some vanished into the hands of knights, others into the vaults of kings. Each splinter carried not just faith, but politics. Now, imagine being a pilgrim in the 13th century. You have walked for weeks, blistered and hungry, to reach a cathedral said to hold a fragment of the true cross. You enter, the choir's voices rising, the reliquary glittering with jewels. You fall to your knees. The priest lifts the relic, and you glimpse the wood through glass. Tears stream down your face. For that moment, you believe you are touching the axis of the world, the wood that bore your Savior. And in that belief, you are healed not in body, perhaps, but in soul. But step into the shoes of a skeptic. You stand in the same cathedral, watching the same reliquary. You ask, how do we know? How can we prove? Wood is wood. The centuries are long, forgeries abound. To you, the relic is not a bridge to salvation, but a manipulation of hope. The reliquary feels less like devotion and more like theater. You turn away, unconvinced, and yet even you cannot deny the power in the room, the way belief itself seems to change the air. Perhaps that is the secret. The relic's power does not depend on authenticity. It depends on the faith it awakens. The Vatican understands this better than anyone. It does not release fragments for testing. It does not open relics to laboratories. Instead, it allows them to remain shrouded in mystery, displayed in ceremonies, carried in processions. The ambiguity is deliberate. Certainty would end the debate. Mystery keeps it alive. So where does that leave us? Are the fragments of the true cross genuine remains of Christ's crucifixion, or are they medieval inventions multiplied to satisfy devotion? The truth may never be known. What matters is that millions believe, and belief itself reshapes the world. Pilgrims walk, pray, weep, and find strength. Kings swore oaths before these splinters. Wars were fought over them. History itself bent around fragments of wood. Think about that. A simple piece of timber, worthless in itself, becomes priceless through faith. It becomes a compass, pointing not to certainty but to hope. And in that hope lies its power. The true cross, real or not, continues to shape the world not because of what it is, but because of what it means. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The cross that once represented execution, humiliation, and death has become the most treasured relic of life and salvation. A paradox carved into wood, scattered into fragments, enshrined in gold. A symbol that outlives empires, questions, and doubt. That is why the Vatican guards its splinters so fiercely, for in them lies not proof, but power, and power, as always, is the Vatican's most sacred relic of all. Part 13, The Holocaust Files, the years 1943. Across Europe, trains rattle through the night, their cargo hidden behind locked doors. Smoke rises from chimneys in Poland, staining the skies above Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. Millions of lives are being extinguished in the greatest atrocity of the modern age, and in Rome, behind the high walls of the Vatican, a man kneels in prayer. He is Pope Pius X. His silence will echo across history. To understand the Vatican's role in the Holocaust, we must step carefully. On one hand, the Vatican sheltered Jews in monasteries, convents, and even within its own walls. Thousands were saved by priests and nuns who risked everything. On the other hand, Pope Pius V never publicly condemned the Nazi extermination of the Jews. His words were cautious, veiled in generalities about innocent victims and the violation of human rights. Never once did he speak the name Jew from the pulpit of St. Peter's during the war. Why? Defenders argue that his silence was strategic. The Vatican was a tiny state surrounded by fascist Italy and later Nazi-occupied Rome. A direct condemnation, they say, might have provoked retaliation, leading to more deaths. Better to act quietly, sheltering in secret, than to roar publicly and invite destruction. Critics, however, argue the opposite, that silence gave Hitler cover, that the moral authority of the papacy could have galvanized resistance, saved lives, and condemned evil in a way that could not be ignored. Silence, they say, was complicity. Pause here. Picture the Vatican during those years. German soldiers march through Rome, swastikas flutter across Italian streets. From the cupola of St. Peter's, the city looks unchanged, domes, piazzas, fountains. But in the shadows, Jews are hunted, deported, slaughtered. Inside the apostolic palace, Pius X sits at his desk, pen in hand, words measured, silence chosen. What must it have felt like, knowing millions were dying, and yet choosing not to speak their name? The debate continues to this day. Some historians hail Pius X as a quiet hero, pointing to Vatican documents that record Jewish refugees being hidden in monasteries with papal approval. Estimates suggest thousands of Jews were saved through such networks. Others condemn him as the silent pope, a man who valued diplomacy over humanity, neutrality over justice. Both views may hold fragments of truth. The Vatican did act, but it did not speak. And in matters of genocide, silence is often louder than speech. Let's widen the lens. The Vatican's caution was not new. For centuries, the papacy had walked a careful line between spiritual authority and political survival. During World War II, that line grew razor thin. The Vatican feared communist Russia as much as Nazi Germany. To condemn Hitler too strongly might empower Stalin, whose atheism was seen as an equal threat. And so the Vatican chose ambiguity, a silence that allowed it to survive, but at the cost of its moral clarity. Now, imagine being a Jewish family in Rome in 1943. German troops round up your neighbors. The air is heavy with fear. And then, unexpectedly, a door opens. A priest ushers you into a convent. You are hidden, fed, given new names. Your life is spared because someone in the Vatican whispered to shelter you. You may never know who gave the order, but you live. For you, the Vatican is salvation. For the millions who perished without such refuge, the Vatican is absence. In recent years, the controversy has sharpened with the opening of archives from Pius XIII's papacy. Historians are combing through letters, reports, and diaries seeking clarity. Some documents confirm the Vatican knew far more than it admitted at the time. Reports of mass killings reached Rome early, yet no public denunciation followed. Other records highlight quiet rescue efforts, networks of priests risking death. The truth, as always, is tangled. Heroism in shadows, silence in light. Consider this detail. On October 16, 1943, German troops raided Rome's Jewish ghetto. Over 1,000 Jews were rounded up and deported to Auschwitz. Few survived. The Vatican was less than a mile away. St. Peter's Dome loomed over the scene. The Pope knew. Yet no public protest was issued. Imagine the silence of those bells, tolling as trains rolled away. The question haunts us still. What is the duty of moral authority in the face of evil? Is it enough to act quietly, saving some, while avoiding words that might endanger more? Or is silence itself a betrayal, a refusal to stand where conscience demands? The Vatican chose one path. History continues to judge it. But perhaps the most unsettling layer is this. The Vatican has never fully resolved its relationship with its past. Beatification processes for Pius XIII continue, despite protests from Jewish organizations. Some Catholics defend him fiercely, insisting he was misjudged. Others argue sainthood would be an insult to the memory of the Holocaust. The debate burns on, fueled by archives still being sifted, still releasing their secrets one parchment at a time. Pause again. Picture yourself walking those archive corridors. You find a file marked 1942. You open it. Inside, a report from Poland detailing mass executions. The ink is faded, but the horror is clear. You realize the Pope had this report. He read it. He knew. And yet his words to the world remained veiled, abstract, distant. In that moment, history breathes heavy upon your shoulders. Silence is no longer absence, it is choice. The Holocaust remains one of the Vatican's deepest scars. No relic, no obelisk, no vault of knowledge casts as long a shadow as this silence. It is not mystery, but memory. And memory does not fade. It lingers, asking questions the Vatican may never fully answer. So we are left with paradox. The Vatican saved lives in silence. The Vatican allowed millions to die in silence. Both are true. Both are unbearable. And perhaps that is the point. History is rarely clean. It is jagged, contradictory, stained. The Vatican's Holocaust files remind us that silence is not neutral. Silence shapes destiny. Silence writes history. And sometimes, silence kills. Part 14, The Ark of the Covenant. Imagine a chest made of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold, its lid crowned by two cherubim whose wings almost touch. Inside, according to Scripture, rested the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod that budded, and a jar of manna from heaven. This was the Ark of the Covenant, the holiest object of the ancient Israelites, said to carry the very presence of God. When the ark moved, nations trembled. When it rested, the earth shook. It was not merely a relic, it was power incarnate, divine thunder sealed in wood and gold. And then it vanished. The Bible offers no clear account of its fate. Some say it was hidden before the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem in 586 BCE. Others insist it was carried away, lost forever in exile. But legends sprouted like vines. The ark, they said, was hidden in a cave by the prophet Jeremiah. Or it was taken to Ethiopia, guarded in the ancient city of Axum, where a small chapel still claims to house it today, watched by a single monk who never leaves. Or perhaps, some whisper, it was carried even further west, into the vaults of Rome, and eventually into the deepest chambers of the Vatican. Pause here. Picture the Vatican's underground vaults, silent as tombs. Shelves groan with manuscripts, reliquaries gleam faintly in the dark, and in a chamber sealed tighter than all others, imagine a golden chest draped in cloth. Its edges gleam even in shadow, its weight hums like thunder beneath your feet. No one enters, no one speaks. But there it rests, the most powerful relic of all time, hidden in silence. Why would the Vatican want the Ark? Some argue it would confirm Christianity's roots in Judaism, linking Christ's sacrifice directly to Israel's covenant. Others suspect a darker motive, to control prophecy. For the Ark, according to tradition, is not just a container, it is a weapon. The Israelites carried it into battle and enemies fell. Walls of Jericho crumbled before it. To possess the Ark would be to hold divine force, not just symbol, but power itself. If the Vatican has it, then silence is more than secrecy. It is strategy. Of course, skeptics scoff. No evidence places the Ark in Rome. The Ethiopian claim, though unverified, is at least visible. The chapel in Axum exists, guarded by monks, its doors forever closed. The Vatican, by contrast, offers nothing. No hints, no confirmations, only silence. Yet silence itself fuels imagination. If the Ark is hidden anywhere, why not the most secretive library on earth? Consider this detail. In the Middle Ages, pilgrims reported seeing treasures in Rome said to be from Jerusalem. Chroniclers mention Jewish relics paraded in triumph when Rome conquered the temple. The Arch of Titus, still standing today, depicts Roman soldiers carrying the menorah from Jerusalem. If the menorah survived, could the Ark have traveled too? Could it have been carried into Rome's vaults, eventually passed into papal custody, quietly sealed away as centuries turned? Now, pause and step into a darker thought. Imagine the Ark is real and the Vatican does possess it. What would happen if it were revealed tomorrow? Pilgrims would flood Rome in uncountable numbers. Believers would see prophecy fulfilled. Skeptics would demand tests, radiocarbon dating, chemical analysis, endless scrutiny. Wars might erupt over ownership. Ethiopia would claim it. Israel would claim it. The world's religions would clash, each demanding the relic as their own. The Vatican, perhaps, knows this. Perhaps secrecy is not about deception, but about survival. To reveal the Ark would tear the world apart. But what if the Ark is more than relic? What if it is still dangerous? Some traditions insist it emits a divine force, lethal to the unworthy. In 2 Samuel, Uzzah reached out to steady it when the oxen stumbled, and he fell dead instantly. Imagine the Vatican acknowledging such a relic. Imagine scientists probing it, only to find radiation, energy, something beyond comprehension. Would humanity be ready? Or would the Ark, like Pandora's box, unleash consequences no one can control? Let's add one more layer. Conspiracy theorists love to connect the Ark with modern power. They argue its designicatia wood, lined with gold, resembles a capacitor, capable of storing immense electrical charge. Some whisper that the Ark was not just a relic, but ancient technology. If true, then to possess it would be to hold knowledge far beyond its time. And if the Vatican does keep it hidden, perhaps it is because faith and science cannot bear such a collision. Now, picture yourself as a visitor in the Vatican. You are led, by some impossible favor, into a chamber beneath the archives. A curtain is drawn aside. Before you rests a chest draped in crimson cloth. Your guide says nothing. You step closer. The air vibrates faintly. Your skin prickles. You feel as though you are standing not before an object, but before a storm. You want to reach out, to touch it, but fear freezes your hand. And then the curtain falls. The silence swallows you. You will never speak of this again. Whether the Ark rests in Axum, in a cave in Jerusalem, or in the Vatican's vaults, its true power lies in mystery. It reminds us that faith thrives not only on what is seen, but on what is hidden. The Ark's absence has made it eternal. Its silence has made it louder than any relic displayed in glass. So, does the Vatican guard the Ark of the Covenant? The world may never know. But perhaps that is the point. Some truths are too heavy to reveal. Some relics are more powerful as mysteries than as objects. And the Ark, whether real or legend, continues to shape imagination, faith, and fear alike. For in the end, the Ark of the Covenant is not just a chest of gold. It is a question, and the Vatican, as always, is its most careful guardian. Part 15. The Fake Mummies. Step into a side chapel in a quiet Roman church. Candles flicker. The air is thick with the smell of wax and incense. Behind glass, a body lies in repose, skin darkened, hands folded, eyes closed as if in eternal prayer. Pilgrims kneel, whispering prayers, convinced they are in the presence of a saint whose incorrupt body testifies to holiness. But what if that body is not what it seems? What if the Vatican, or the Church more broadly, has displayed relics that are less than holy? Fake mummies, forged remains, saints that never were. Relics have always held power. The faithful travel across continents to touch a bone, to glimpse a skull, to kiss a fragment of cloth. With relics come devotion. With devotion comes wealth. Cathedrals grew rich on pilgrim traffic. Towns thrived because they held a saint's finger or rib. But where demand outstrips supply, deception often follows. And the Vatican, guardian of relics, has not been immune. Consider the case of the catacomb saints. In the 16th and 17th centuries, skeletons were exhumed from Roman catacombs and sent across Europe, lavishly decorated with jewels, dressed in fine clothes and presented as ancient martyrs. Towns believed they possessed holy bodies. But centuries later, scholars uncovered the truth. Many of these skeletons were anonymous Romans and not saints at all. Faith had been built on bones without names. Then there are the Egyptian mummies. During the Renaissance, fascination with Egypt flooded Europe. Mummies were purchased, displayed, even ground into powder and sold as medicine. Some found their way into church collections, mistaken or deliberately presented as relics of biblical figures. Stories emerged of mummies labeled as Old Testament prophets, even as companions of Jesus. Most were false, yet pilgrims believed, prayed, wept before them. The line between relic and forgery blurred into mist. Pause here. Picture yourself as a pilgrim in the 1600s. You enter a cathedral where a jeweled skeleton rests in a glass case. The priest proclaims it a saint who died for Christ. You kneel, tears streaking your face, convinced you are in the presence of holiness. But beneath the jewels lies the body of an ordinary Roman, nameless, forgotten, pressed into sainthood by accident or design. Does that make your prayer less real? Or is faith, once awakened, holy, no matter the truth? The Vatican itself has faced similar controversies. Throughout history, relics attributed to saints, apostles, even Christ himself have been challenged as fakes. Multiple churches claim to possess the head of John the Baptist, or the bones of Mary Magdalene, or the foreskin of Christ, insisting theirs was authentic. To outsiders, it is absurd. To believers, each fragment carries power. The Vatican has often responded with silence, neither confirming nor denying, allowing devotion to continue unchallenged. But silence does not erase suspicion. In the 19th century, investigations revealed that some supposed relics were fraudulent. Mummies displayed as saints were nothing more than preserved bodies from antiquity, rebranded for faith. Skulls venerated as apostles were later identified as common bones. Even the holy shroud of Besançon, once revered as Christ's burial cloth, was exposed as a forgery, yet it drew pilgrims for centuries before the truth emerged. Now, consider the psychology of relics. To the faithful, authenticity is often secondary. The relic is not just an object, it is a bridge, a focal point for belief. A false bone can inspire true devotion. A mislabeled mummy can heal the soul. In this sense, fakes can function as powerfully as the real. But to skeptics, this is manipulation, exploitation of hope for profit and control. Faith, they argue, deserves truth, not theater. Let's add one more layer. In recent years, modern science has begun to test relics with carbon dating, DNA analysis, and forensic techniques. Some survive scrutiny, others do not. Fragments once claimed as apostles' bones turned out to be medieval. Supposed relics of biblical figures proved to belong to animals. Each exposure chips at the aura of relics. And yet, belief endures. Pilgrims still flock. Mystery still outweighs certainty. Pause again. Imagine yourself descending into the Vatican's reliquary vaults. The air is cool, the light dim. Dozens of cases line the wall, skulls crowned with jewels, bones wrapped in silk, mummies in ornate coffins. You walk slowly, peering into each glass case. Which are real? Which are fakes? The labels tell you nothing. The silence is complete. You realize the truth. Authenticity here is irrelevant. The relics exist not as facts, but as symbols. They are mirrors, reflecting whatever faith you bring with you. The Vatican rarely speaks of these scandals. To admit fraud would undermine centuries of devotion. To confirm authenticity would invite scientific testing. Better, perhaps, to say nothing, to let the relics live in mystery. But the whispers remain. Fake mummies, forged saints, bones misnamed and misused. They remind us that even in faith, deception can flourish, and that sometimes the holiest lies are the ones people choose to believe. So, the next time you see a relic displayed in gold and glass, ask yourself, what matters more, the authenticity of the bone or the devotion it inspires? If faith is built on truth, fakes are betrayal. But if faith is built on meaning, then even a forgery can be holy. That paradox is the true relic. And the Vatican, as always, guards it in silence. Part 16. The Scandals of Power. Close your eyes and imagine the Vatican not as the solemn heart of Christendom, but as a palace of whispers, poison, and lust. The year is the late 15th century. Rome is a city of intrigue, its streets crawling with mercenaries, merchants, and spies. Inside the papal apartments, candles burn low, goblets of wine overflow, and in the corridors of power, the name whispered most often is Borgia. The Borgias were not the first corrupt family to climb Rome's ladders, but they became the most notorious. Their patriarch, Rodrigo Borgia, rose through the ranks of the church with cunning and calculation, until in 1492 he seized the papal throne as Pope Alexander VI. His papacy would become a legend not of holiness, but of scandal. Alexander VI has openly flaunted his children, something shocking for a man sworn to celibacy. He filled Vatican offices with relatives, arranged marriages to secure power, and built alliances not through prayer, but through politics and poison. His son, Cesare Borgia, became the model for Machiavelli's "the prince ruthless, ambitious, feared." His daughter, Lucrezia Borgia, became the subject of endless rumors, cast by enemies as a seductress, poisoner, and conspirator, though modern historians argue she was more pawn than villain. The Borgias ruled not as shepherds, but as monarchs of ambition. Pause here. Picture a papal banquet. The hall glitters with tapestries, music swells, and golden dishes are laid upon the table. But the laughter is sharp, the wine heavy, the smiles edged with threat. Somewhere in the feast, a cup is laced with poison. A rival will not see dawn. This is not the Church of Saints. This is the Church of Shadows. One of the most infamous tales is the so-called Banquet of Chestnuts. According to a chronicler, 50 courtesans danced for the Pope, his son Cesare, and his courtiers, scattering chestnuts on the floor as they crawled to retrieve them. Prizes were given for the most vigorous performance. Whether exaggerated or invented, the story clung to the Borgias, cementing their image as libertines ruling the church like a decadent court. Truth and rumor blurred, but the stain remained. And yet, beneath the scandal, power pulsed. Cesare Borgia carved out territories in central Italy, commanding armies, seizing fortresses, bending lords to his will. His cruelty was legendary. He invited rival captains to a banquet, smiling as they drank, only for assassins to strike, leaving corpses sprawled on the floor. His ambition terrified Italy. His methods fascinated Machiavelli, who saw in him the ruthless efficiency of a modern ruler. Lucrezia, meanwhile, was married off to secure alliances, moved like a piece on a chessboard. Yet, she became more than pawn. As Duchess of Ferrara, she ruled with intelligence, charm, and culture, gathering artists and poets to her court. The rumors of poison and incest may have been exaggerations, but they revealed how deeply the Borgias unsettled Europe. A pope with children who wielded armies and seduced princes. The papacy itself looked less like a spiritual throne and more like a dynasty. Pause again. Imagine being a pilgrim in Rome during Alexander VI's reign. You arrive expecting holiness, only to find streets filled with mercenaries, courtiers whispering of scandals, and the Pope himself fathering children in the apostolic palace. Do you weep? Do you rage? Or do you shrug, knowing power always corrupts? And perhaps the papacy is no different. The Borgias' scandals did not end with their lives. Enemies spread stories for centuries that Lucrezia carried a hollow ring filled with poison, ready to slip into a goblet, that Cesare murdered his own brother in a fit of jealousy, that Alexander VI died from drinking poisoned wine meant for someone else. Some tales are apocryphal, others exaggerated. But in history, perception often matters more than fact, and the perception was clear. The Borgias turned the Vatican into a court of vice. Yet, here's the paradox. For all their corruption, the Borgias also strengthened the papacy. Alexander II expanded its political influence. Cesare reasserted papal power in Italy. And their dynasty left behind art, architecture, and legacies that endure. They embodied both the danger and necessity of power. Corrupt, yes, but effective. And perhaps that is the most disturbing truth. The Vatican, like any institution, has survived not through purity, but through adaptation, through scandal, through compromise, through ambition. The Borgias remind us that the papacy is not immune to the sins of men. It has been shaped as much by lust and greed as by prayer and sacrifice. Picture, finally, the Vatican Palace after Alexander VI's death. The halls are silent, the banquets ended, the air still smells of wax and wine. Outside, the city whispers, waiting for the next pope. The Borgias are gone, but their shadow remains etched into the stones. Their scandals became legend, their names synonymous with corruption. And yet, the Vatican endured. It always does. The Borgias are a reminder that the Vatican is not only a place of saints, but of sinners. Not only a house of prayer, but a palace of power. Their story is both warning and mirror. For in their ambition, we see the eternal tension between faith and power, between holiness and corruption, a tension that still haunts the Vatican's halls today. Part 17, Symbols and Gods, stand in the Vatican gardens on a quiet afternoon. The noise of pilgrims fades, the dome of St. Peter's gleams in the distance, and fountains trickle among sculpted hedges. Here, in the shadow of Christendom's holiest site, you encounter something strange. A giant bronze pine cone, nearly 4 meters tall, weathered by centuries, flanked by 2 stone peacocks. At first, it seems decorative, a curiosity among fountains and statues. But linger, and questions stir. Why a pine cone? Why peacocks? And why, in the heart of the Vatican, do symbols of pagan gods stand so proudly? The pine cone has long been a symbol across cultures. In Mesopotamia, Assyrian carvings depict winged figures holding pine cones aloft, as if offering them to the gods. In Greek and Roman tradition, the pine cone was sacred to Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, adorning the staff he carried, the thyrsus. In Egypt, the pine cone echoed the symbol of eternal life, linked to Osiris. Even in Hindu and Buddhist art, pine cones resemble the third eye, a symbol of enlightenment. Across cultures, across centuries, the pine cone is the emblem of the pineal gland, the so-called seat of the soul, the place where spirit meets flesh. So why is it here, in the Vatican, resting quietly among saints and crosses? Some argue it is a relic of Rome's pagan past, once standing near the Pantheon before being relocated to the Vatican. Others whisper it remains as a quiet acknowledgement that the Church, for all its triumphs, has absorbed the symbols of older faiths rather than erase them. The pine cone becomes a bridge, pagan fertility transformed into Christian resurrection, Dionysus ecstasy transmuted into the joy of eternal life. And then there are the patro, peacocks. To the ancients, the peacock was sacred to Hera and Juno, queens of the gods. Its feathers, glittering with eyes, were symbols of eternity and watchfulness. Early Christians adopted the bird as a symbol of immortality, believing its flesh did not decay. The peacocks that flank the pine cone in the Vatican courtyard are not accidental decoration. They are part of a continuum, a merging of old gods into new faith. Pause here. Picture yourself walking through that courtyard at twilight. The pine cone looms above you, green with age, its surface mottled by centuries of rain. The peacocks sit silently, their stone feathers etched with ancient eyes. You feel a strange unease. This is the Vatican, the heart of Catholicism, yet the symbols before you predate Christ by centuries. You realize the truth. The Vatican is not a clean break from pagan Rome. It is an inheritance, a palimpsest, a city built atop older gods, older rituals, older symbols. The pine cone is not the only pagan echo. Consider the papal mitre. The tall, pointed hat worn by popes. To many, it resembles the headgear of ancient priests, even the headdresses of Mesopotamian deities. The obelisks. In St. Peter's Square and elsewhere in Rome, were carried from Egypt, monuments to Ra and Osiris, repurposed as Christian trophies. Even the Vatican's calendar, its festivals and holy days, often overlap with older pagan feasts, the winter solstice becoming Christmas, the spring fertility rites transforming into Easter. The Vatican, knowingly or not, carries the DNA of pagan Rome in its veins. Critics call this syncretism, a blending that dilutes the purity of Christianity. Supporters call it genius, a way of transforming symbols, baptizing them into new meaning. But either way, the truth is inescapable. The Vatican is a city of echoes. Its stones whisper not only of Peter and Paul, but of Jupiter and Dionysus, Isis and Osiris, Hera and Juno. Let's add another layer. The pine cone is often linked to the pineal gland, that mysterious organ deep in the brain. Descartes called it the seat of the soul. Modern mystics call it the third eye. To them, it represents spiritual awakening, perception beyond the ordinary senses. And here, in the Vatican, the pine cone stands monumental, as if declaring that the Church too knows of this hidden eye, this connection between human and divine. Is it coincidence, or quiet acknowledgement of truths that transcend religion? Now, pause and imagine yourself as a pilgrim centuries ago. You enter the Vatican and see these symbol spine cone, peacocks, obelisks. You do not recognize their pagan past. You are told they symbolize resurrection, immortality, eternity. And you believe. To you, they are Christian. Yet the stones remember otherwise. They remember Rome before Christ. They remember gods who came before. The Vatican has painted new meanings upon old symbols, but the bones of the symbols remain. Some conspiracy theorists take it further. They argue the Vatican secretly preserves pagan wisdom, hiding ancient rites beneath Christian liturgy. They see in the pine cone a symbol of occult knowledge, in the obelisk a phallic emblem of fertility, in the peacock a secret of immortality. To them, the Vatican is not merely Christian. It is the heir to a long line of mystery religions, cloaking ancient power in new vestments. Whether true or not, the theory thrives because the symbols are undeniable. They are here, in plain sight, unexplained, unsettling. But perhaps the truth is simpler and deeper. The Vatican is not merely Christian. It is Roman. It was born in the empire, grew upon its ruins, and absorbed its symbols. To erase them would be to erase its own birth. Instead, it transformed them. The pine cone became eternal life. The peacock became immortality. The obelisk became the cross's pedestal. Pagan Rome became Christian Rome. And in that transformation lies the Vatican's genius, to take the past, baptize it, and make it serve the future. So the next time you walk through the Vatican gardens, pause before the giant pine cone. Let your eyes linger on the peacocks. Feel the weight of centuries in those symbols. They are not relics of faith. They are relics of continuity, proof that history does not break cleanly, that religions inherit from one another like children from parents. The Vatican may preach Christ alone, but its stones still whisper of gods who came before. And perhaps that is the true power of the Vatican, not that it erased the past, but that it swallowed it whole. Part 18. The Lost Gospels. Picture a dimly lit chamber, the air thick with age. Shelves bow under the weight of manuscripts bound in fading leather, their pages brittle as autumn leaves. Most of the world will never see them. They are the Lost Gospels. Books once written in the name of apostles and disciples, but excluded from the Bible we know today. Some were condemned as heresy, others vanished into obscurity. Yet whispers insist that the Vatican guards them still, hidden in its archives, their words too dangerous to release. The Bible, as we know it, was not born whole. It was forged across centuries, through councils and debates, choices and exclusions. In the 4th century, the Council of Nicaea and later gatherings defined what was Scripture and what was not. Dozens of writings, Gospels, Acts, Apocalypse were left out. Some were destroyed. Some survived only in fragments. These texts tell different stories of Jesus, his followers, and the early church, and they paint a picture far less uniform than the one the Vatican prefers. Consider the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Discovered in fragments in the 19th century, it portrays Mary not as a minor figure, but as a central disciple, one who understood Christ's teachings more deeply than the others. In its pages, Peter and Andrew dismiss her, but Levi defends her. Surely the Savior knew her very well, for he loved her more than us. Imagine what that means. A gospel in which Mary, a woman, is not only disciple, but leader. A gospel that challenges the male hierarchy of the church. No wonder such a text was buried. Then there is the Gospel of Thomas, unearthed in Egypt in 1945 among the Nag Hammadi codices. It contains sayings of Jesus, some familiar, others strange. The kingdom is inside you, and it is outside you. It presents Christ less as Savior through sacrifice and more as teacher of hidden wisdom. No crucifixion, no resurrection, only enlightenment. To the early church, such teachings were heresy, a threat to the doctrine of salvation. To us today, they raise haunting questions. Was there more than one version of Christianity at its birth? Did the Vatican choose one and silence the rest? Pause here. Imagine opening one of those manuscripts in the Vatican's vaults. The parchment cracks under your fingers. The ink, brown with age, forms words unseen for centuries. A gospel that speaks of Jesus laughing at the crucifixion, or teaching secrets to a chosen disciple, or hinting at a human, more vulnerable side. You feel your heart race. If these words were made public, faith as we know it might shift forever. And perhaps that is why they remain in silence. The Vatican has always denied hoarding such texts, yet history shows otherwise. The Gospel of Judas, discovered in the 1970s, revealed a shocking twist. Judas as Christ's chosen instrument, not traitor but fulfiller of destiny. It surfaced not through the Vatican, but through antiquities markets and scholars. If one gospel could hide in the sands of Egypt for centuries, how many more lie sealed in Rome? And what truths or heresies do they contain? Let's add another layer. Some lost gospels paint Jesus as more human, married perhaps, fathering children. Others emphasize mystical visions, secret knowledge, cosmic battles. Each challenges the tidy narrative preserved in the New Testament. Each raises questions the Vatican would rather leave unanswered. Was Christianity always unified, or was it born in diversity, fractured, contested, shaped by winners and losers? If the Gospels of Mary, Thomas, and Judas had been canonized, how different would faith look today? Now, imagine being an early Christian in the 2nd century. You gather in a candlelit home, unrolling a parchment that tells of Jesus teaching in ways never heard in public. You believe it is truth, sacred and divine. Yet a century later, that parchment is condemned, burned, forgotten. Your faith erased not by time, but by decision. Councils declared orthodoxy, and orthodoxy silenced dissent. The Bible, in that sense, is not only revelation, it is selection. Critics argue that such lost gospels do not diminish Christianity, but enrich it, showing the breadth of early faith. Believers counter that these texts are dangerous, distortions created by sects outside true teaching. The Vatican, caught between history and theology, chooses silence. To release too much would confuse the faithful, fracture unity, unravel centuries of doctrine. Better, perhaps, to keep the Gospels locked away. Pause again. Picture yourself standing in St. Peter's Basilica, surrounded by grandeur. You know that somewhere beneath these stones lie manuscripts that tell different stories, different truths. You wonder, what if the Vatican opened them? What if tomorrow the Gospel of Mary was proclaimed authentic, its words read aloud at Mass? What would that mean for a church built on male hierarchy? Would it crumble? Or would it finally expand to embrace the voices silenced long ago? The lost Gospels remind us that history is never simple. Truth is not always preserved by the victors. Sometimes it is buried, burned, or hidden. Sometimes it lies in silence, waiting for rediscovery. And sometimes it lies in the Vatican, sealed behind walls that never yield. So the question remains, does the Vatican keep lost Gospels hidden in its archives? No one outside its walls can say. But perhaps the more important question is this: what would we do if they were revealed? Would we embrace them or reject them? Would they deepen faith or destroy it? The Vatican's silence suggests it already knows the answer, and that answer perhaps is too heavy for the world to bear. The lost Gospels, whether real or legend, remind us that history is not only what is written, it is also what is erased, and in that erasure lies the greatest mystery of all. Part 19. The Modern Scandals. When you picture the Vatican, you may imagine soaring domes, marble altars, and golden light pouring through stained glass. But behind the beauty lies another Vatican, marked not by saints but by scandal. If history has taught us anything, it is that power always attracts shadows. And in the modern age, those shadows have been cast by money, secrets, and betrayal. Let's begin with the Vatican Bank, formerly the Institute for the Works of Religion. Its purpose was noble, to manage funds for religious and charitable projects. But in the 20th century, it became infamous for corruption. Allegations of money laundering, tax evasion, and ties to the mafia turned the holy institution into something darker. Consider the case of Roberto Calvi, nicknamed God's Banker. In the 1970s and 80s, Calvi managed billions through the Vatican Bank, but his empire collapsed in scandal. In 1982, his body was found hanging beneath Blackfriars Bridge in London, pockets stuffed with bricks. Was it suicide? Or execution by the mafia, punishing betrayal? Investigations revealed ties between Calvi, the Vatican Bank, and the secretive Masonic Lodge P2. The Vatican denied involvement, but suspicion lingered. Money meant for charity had vanished into shadows, leaving death in its wake. Pause here. Picture the Vatican Bank's office, quiet, modest, tucked behind guarded doors. On the surface, it looks ordinary. But behind those walls, billions have flowed in silence, some destined for good, others disappearing into dark networks. The irony is heavy. The world's smallest state guarding one of the most secretive banks, its vaults filled not only with faith but with financial ghosts. Then came the Vatileaks scandal of 2012. Thousands of confidential documents leaked by the Pope's own butler revealed corruption, infighting, and backroom deals. Letters described mismanagement, cover-ups, and plots swirling around Benedict XVI. For the first time, the Vatican's inner workings spilled into public view, not through rumor, but through proof. The butler, Paolo Gabriele, was arrested, but the damage was done. The Vatican looked less like a city of saints and more like a palace of intrigue, a throne surrounded not by devotion, but by knives. And deeper still lies the darkest scandal of all, the clerical abuse crisis. For decades, cases of sexual abuse by priests